students and privately. I guess more than say dancer. I do love to dance and juggle and other things, but it wasn't completely intentional. But now that you mention it, yeah, probably makes
Probably.
sense.
One of the things I was struck with as you and I emailed back and forth before this interview was that you mentioned that your memory, you're not quite sure about your memory of your family and your family heritage, and I think you even used the term, I know about maybe the last 5 minutes of my family heritage. Talk to us a little bit about that and what that connection you have, but how limited you feel it is.
Sure. I think I get most of what I remember from stories and from movies. My dad was a prolific movie taker. I mean, when I was growing up, this was in the 60s and early 70s, and he was, taking movies right and left. And so I watch those, and then it jogs things in my memory, or I listen to my mom tell a story, or my aunt or somebody. And so, I tend to rely on those types of things to jog my memory. When it's jogged, yeah, a whole bunch of things come back, but I don't go around thinking all the time about the past. It's kind of you got to be present in the moment type of world these days. So I'm, cognizant of the past, but not living there. So it takes that jog.
I was struck by it because as I'm recruiting people to participate in this project, I can't tell you how many people will write to me and say, I would love to do it, but I just don't know enough about my family. I don't know anything. And it's, like you said, you live in the present. I haven't thought much about that myself. And I feel lucky because my family really does try to pay attention to the past and talk about the old family stories, and we share those things. Have you found yourself when you talk to other people and they start talking about their past that we don't really know a lot about our grandparents, our great-grandparents?
I'd say most of the people that I know know something, but most of the Armenians that I know don't know anything about their great-grandparents because of the massacre, but and that was in the 1915 area. But I'm surprised by people like my wife, for example, who has an amazing memory and can pull up things. So I think it depends a little bit on your situation, but also on your ability. Some people are better at remembering than others, and she can pull up amazing details, and other people I know that about family stories in ways that I just can't remember what I was wearing in 1965 or something. So.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about your ethnic background.
Okay. I'm Armenian, and that means I'm from a small country east of Turkey, and back in the day, talking hundreds of years ago, it used to be larger, and most of what is now Turkey. Turkey is Muslim, Armenia is Christian, and there have been a lot of religious wars through the years, but mostly, like I said, in the 1915 era, the Ottoman Turks decided that we were somehow infringing on their area, and I don't really know all the details, even though I've read a lot about it. Right. But it was a bad time for my ancestors, and my grandparents were without parents, were orphans at a young age in their early teens, and then all four of them had different ways of getting here, but in one way or another found their way to the United States, either through Ellis Island or through Canada, and started a new life here, coming here mostly by themselves or in pairs, but not with adults.
Your grandparents' journey being connected to world history, I mean, that's profound. That's something that, for me, I know when I think about my grandparents and great-grandparents coming through Ellis Island, it was so moving for me when I went with my wife to see Ellis Island. Have you visited Ellis Island, or where your grandparents may have come through in Canada, or even have you traveled overseas to visit where your family's roots start?
Unfortunately, I haven't been back to Armenia or been to Armenia. I'd like to go someday, but I have been to Ellis Island and kind of was thinking a lot about my grandparents, mostly my mother's father, while I was there. Thinking about them coming through with thousands of other people at a young age, mostly by themselves. And having recently lost their parents. So I guess it is sort of a gripping thing. And I mean, I don't know how much you want me to talk about this part, but I mean, I think about things like, just the sheer number of people who were killed varies depending on what thing you listen to. Like most Armenians say over 1 million people were killed, but you hear other reports of, thousands, and so you don't really know what to believe because, you didn't live through it. And when I actually got to know my grandparents, they spoke mostly Armenian, so it was a little hard communicating sometimes. So I never really got a real clear idea from them. But I always got the idea that they struggled mightily to get here. Were very happy to be here, appreciated the freedoms that this country and the peacefulness that this country affords. And so yeah, as I was there at Ellis Island, I felt that, and very, very strongly.
Yeah, it's a powerful place, and aside from my own family memories and connections, I was just struck by all the different faces from so many different places on Earth, and with connections from so many different moments in history. I think I looked at people's faces as much as I looked at the architecture, and the artifacts that were there as well.
True, yeah, you learn a lot from people's faces, and you get a sense for how they feel about the whole situation they're going through, and yeah, it was a very, very powerful visually also.
So you shared with me some of your writing, and one of the first pieces of writing, as I started to look through your stuff, is a poem called "A Hope Unspoken," which you dedicate to your grandparents. And I'd asked you before we'd done the interview if you wouldn't mind reading it for us, because I'd like to ask some questions from the poem. So if you would you even read the dedication part as well? Because I think it's important to have your grandparents' names out there as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Here it is. Yeah, it's called "A Hope Unspoken," and it's dedicated to my grandparents, who were Mardaros and Karetzi Gadoshin, and Geragos and Aram Kabodian. Sometimes I forget. They lived with the pain of their parents' murders. No safety net, no example, no peace. Life was of their making, with a daily pain remembered. Sometimes I forget. They were so young and came so far. It could have been any place, but they settled here, led to this more perfect place. Sometimes I forget they spoke from their hearts, but were not understood, for their words were foreign, this new land distrustful. Sometimes I forget they coped with little, provided for many, complained minimally, praised the Lord. They laughed, sang, danced, hugged life with a hope unspoken, my life.
How long did it take you to put that together so that you were happy with it, that you feel like it did your grandparents justice?
Well, I wrote it initially in an hour or two, but then getting back to your question, it took days. I had a couple people look at it. Yeah, I would say overall it took a week to get it to where I wanted it.
Is there a line or a segment that is really the heart of it for you?
Well, the last two stanzas, I guess. The first few stanzas sort of lead into the fact that their lives were filled with giving, providing and praising and looking to the future Uh, you know, I'm sure they were more kind of in survival mode for a while there, but I'm taking it from this point of view that their actions um, were pointed toward the future, my life and my brother and sister's lives, and that sort of thing. So the last two stanzas, I think, were the hardest to get just so, and meant a lot, I thought.
Have there been any traditions, that you remember from your grandparents that you saw passed down to your parents or even into your own family today?
Well, I mean, the main traditions are things like food and music and the language, and just the kind of the general ones. My parents spoke Armenian and English, and I spoke Armenian for a while. The language is rich, and I can say now that I understand quite a bit of it, but unfortunately, since I don't speak it daily, I don't produce it very well, and that's sort of a loss that I feel. The food, though, lives on. I mean, my wife and I both make the food, and my brothers and sisters make the food, and my mom still makes the food. It's just so rich between the baklava and all the different things that we make. It sort of, I feel a connection to the past when I just eat the food. And then you go to an Armenian wedding and dance your butt off to a line dance, and feel connection, like the line stretches all the way back, sort of a thing to time. So it's there are some powerful moments when you feel a connection. Absolutely.
I'm glad you said that, because I see the similarity between, when I think of you writing, in some respects to understand a little bit more about your past, to connect yourself to your past, and you're writing about people who you admitted at one point where you couldn't talk to them too much about their memories, their stories. You interacted, you had memories, but there was a bit of a language barrier between you and your grandparents. And food, you don't need those words, right? I mean, food is that automatic connection, and music and dancing, and I see those things really gel together. The idea of you writing about people who you struggle to, in some ways, communicate with, do you find that coming up as you write and as you think about them? I mean, how did you communicate? Actually, another question would be, how did you communicate with your grandparents if there was that limitation in language?
Well, often my parents would be around, so it was like having an interpreter sometimes. I would have a question, and my grandparents weren't understanding, so my mom would translate it into Armenian. But they did pick up little bits and pieces of English. So and then there's also the made-up language. They didn't have the word refrigerator in Armenian, so you get the refrigerator kind of a thing. You get kind of making up things and pointing, and
right.
So that comes up. But also, as I got older, I did pick up more Armenian, and in my later teens, I was able to communicate a little bit more in the language, since I was living near them and saw them regularly, and I just used the language more. But those were some of the ways, I guess. I got some of the stories, like I guess my aunts and other people who knew things. Like my grandfather, for example, for years told me when I was young that he was a stowaway. Like, really cool. I want to know more about this. And the more I asked him about it, I didn't get very many answers. And then I found out later that he wasn't a stowaway. It was just a story to make me, interested as a young kid in the trip.
Right.
But that I could tell that something was going on, even though I couldn't understand him completely. That he was, as I got older, and then the truth came out, sort of thing.
Well, you bring up this idea that people are more than some of the concrete memories we have of them, how they connect to history, and this was my great-grandmother and they were from here. You bring up people's idiosyncrasies, the fun things about people, the charming things about people. Are there some favorite little anecdotes about any of your grandparents that come up for you?
Sure. Many, but I guess the one that comes first would be my grandma Kabodian, Anig, who we ended up naming my daughter's middle name after anyway. She had a wonderful laugh, and you didn't hear it very often because times were tough, and it was sort of like just a special thing to hear her kind of little giggle, and so I would try to spend some time with her, and this was a time when I was interested in cooking, so I learned how to make porev kufta from watching her, because I was the oldest son, and I was just I just had time to spend with her, and just the way that she would show me, and you can't really. She wasn't telling me in words; she was just doing it, and so and then I would try and do something next to her, and then I'd get the laugh, or I'd get the look, or whatever that would be like, "You're not getting it. Okay, we gotta reteach this one." And so, and then years after her death, I was realizing that nobody was making porev kufta anymore. And so I took that on as my thing. Like, I don't make many Armenian foods, but I found a recipe in an Armenian cookbook, and it jogged all my memories. And I went, oh yeah, I can do this. And so for years, I've been making porev kufta. So I'm one of the family who's keeping that tradition going, because I, first of all, love the food. I like these.
What is
like
it?
Meat.
Yeah.
Porev kufta is meatballs. They're stuffed meatballs. It's like lamb inside of lamb, sort of.
Okay.
It's and you get to kind of play. So it's hands-on. Like I have to play like Play-Doh sort of thing. Make a meatball, and then you stuff it, and makes the house smell excellent with all the herbs and things that you're putting in it. And so yeah, that's been real special connection. That's the one that comes to mind first, because I kind of feel like I'm continuing her love of that food, and and sharing it with others.
You had mentioned that your family had settled, I guess is the best word, in Michigan, in Pontiac, Michigan. Is that correct?
That's right.
And so was that an Armenian enclave, or were your parents, grandparents alone, so to speak? Were there other Armenians around?
Well, they were in a neighborhood with other Armenians. The big cities were generally where the Armenians hang out. There's a big Armenian community in New York and Boston and Detroit, and so this was sort of a near Detroit enclave of Armenians. But yeah, they talk about when they were growing up that there were a lot of other Armenians around, and they would go to like picnics on the weekends at a park. I'm not sure exactly what distance away, with other Armenians, and swim and have activities and cook shish kebab and whatever. But yeah, so it was not isolated.
Right. Because in your poem, one of your lines talks about how they spoke from their heart, yet were often misunderstood or not heard, and that's where that question came from for me. Just wondering, did they have those other people that they could connect with in their life?
Yeah, I guess I'm talking mostly about things like getting a job and going to the groceries and all the other parts of life. But they had a community. Yeah, it was definitely a rich community.
And so let's follow the timeline through to your parents, and then you, as a child. Did you grow up in an Armenian community, or were you in a mixed community?
Yeah, it was pretty split. I was a good half an hour from the closest Armenian church, and one of my parents was more from the side that we should go to that Armenian church, and one of my other parents was like, let's go to the closest Catholic church. So we would go back and forth between the Catholic Church weekly, and then once a month, or maybe even less, we'd go to the Armenian church in Southfield for bazaars and other activities and church. But yeah, I felt pretty split between the two.
When I grew up in Philadelphia, in the city, downtown in the city, and primarily an Italian neighborhood that butted up against other ethnic neighborhoods, primarily Irish, but there was a mix. And I can remember as a kid, a teenager, an adolescent, being really very, proud and trying to be tough, like with other kids with your ethnic background and kids defending that. Was that going on in Pontiac, Michigan, between the ethnic groups of kids, or did that not exist? Like, do you remember feeling like I am Armenian and I'm going to defend that, or I'm going to be proudly put that out there?
Well, I actually grew up in Rochester, which is real close to Pontiac. But my parents, I really don't know if they had to do that. I got the sense there might have been a little bit of that, having to stand up for your
heritage.
When I was in Rochester, I think there were only 2 or 3 other Armenians. So when we would get together, it was a connection, and we were friends immediately, and we would have each other's backs, but it wasn't like we had a little support group or gang or anything. Right. It was just, if we were in a class together or something, we sat by each other and, asked each other questions about our families. But it was more of a rarity in Rochester as I was growing up in the late 60s and early 70s than it would have been in Pontiac for my folks.
Okay. Let's get back to your folks. You talked a little bit about your dad was just great with his hands. He was a builder, and he could see things that way and get things done. Tell me a little bit about what you remember about that and what you admired about that.
Yeah, I was pretty much in awe of it. He would go out in the garage and work on the car for hours and ask me to come out and, be a part of that. Again, oldest child. And so, I would hold the light for him while he was working on the car, and he'd be telling me how to do something, and then the next time I would not remember it. It was as if he was talking to the wrong child or something. My younger brothers ended up being an engineer and doing other things, and so they got a little bit more of that. But I was mostly amazed at what he could do and felt sort of disconnected from it. It was not my that sort of hands-on thing wasn't my thing. I didn't think technically, when he'd come home and want to talk about, well, actually, very infrequently want to talk about what he did, like because he worked on airplanes in the Air Force, and or even when he was trying to explain to me what he did on the car, I was just in a different world, and so it was less of a way to connect than I wish. But now looking back on it, I wish I'd done a little bit more paying attention and picked it up, because it would have been helpful in various ways.
Was he self-taught in that respect, or did he go through any formal training?
Well, I think when he started in the Air Force, that he went through several trainings, and I think he picks up some of it there. But yeah, I think there was a certain amount of learning from necessity to help around the house when he was growing up. So it was probably a combination of those things. He just took to it so well, and figured stuff out, and then asked questions. And but yeah, he was trained in the Air Force too.
Did he speak much about his military experience?
No, it was somewhat of a mystery to me. The only time I really felt a connection to it is when we went to Selfridge Air Force Base with him on the occasional weekend family day. And I can remember sitting up in the front of in the pilot's seat of like a B-52 and kind of going, wow, this is cool. My dad helps keep these running. And that sort of pride in what he was doing, I remember that strongly. And getting to wear the big headphone things, I can't remember what they're called, so that the sound of the airplanes didn't burst your eardrums. Just feeling like he was leading us around and he knew what was going on. I felt that, but the pride of that. But as far as what he did every day, all I knew is that he worked on the planes and then was in charge of the people that worked on the planes after that. So
was he ever away from home with the military, or was he always working right there at home?
He was always based out of Selfridge when I was alive, and I think before that he moved around a little bit. But he would go for trainings down in Warner Robins, Georgia, or somewhere in Texas or whatever for a couple of weeks, and then come back. He did that a few times, but we were fortunate that we didn't have to travel as much as some other military families that I was aware of. Yeah, he was.
So is your mother Armenian?
Yes, they're both Armenian.
So how did they come together? Do you know their story, how they met? And
Well, yeah, they grew up in the same neighborhood.
okay.
They were both living in Pontiac, and then yeah, how they met is not coming right to my head. But once they started dating, I remember that that it went pretty fast because they were older when they got
Okay.
together. They weren't. It wasn't a first time thing. So they knew each other. They knew of each other from being in the neighborhood, but they hadn't connected until later. I think. Let's see, 1959. My dad was in his 30s, and my mom, so that they were older. And I guess the best story about them and their courtship was that they were once they had decided to get married, the whole religious thing kind of got in the way, and my dad had asked my mom to go through the classes to become Catholic, and my mom said, no, I don't want to do that, and my grandma was pushing one way or the other, and then just kind of they broke apart for a while. They weren't actually talking, and they had decided not to get married, and so there's that story in our family about how it took my mom kind of going, okay, this marriage is important enough to me that I'm going to take this step, and so they ended up getting back together, and the marriage continued, but it was the notion that to have some pride and to stand up for what's important to you, but also to know when the line comes that you have to balance other things and say these other things are more important, and so that was kind of a lesson learned for all of us from
Sure.
that.
Yeah, let's stay with your mother for a second. In your email to me, you had mentioned just how remarkable, I think you used that word, remarkable, your mom was raising four of you.
Correct.
Yeah, right, four of you. Yep. So
Yes.
what bubbles to the surface for you when you think of that? You think of that word. Like, what was it about your mom that was just so remarkable?
Well, several things, but I guess the things that comes to mind first are kind of the attitude she had about it. I don't remember her being one that got upset, angry, frustrated. She was always upbeat, very positive, joking, in the midst of bringing up four kids and that are all clumped together within 5 years. She's got all these diapers to do because they didn't. This is like cloth diapers, and she was trying to spend time with all of us, and I think we all felt like she was there for us, and still did this amazing cooking, and the house was immaculate, and I mean she just I looked at what she did in terms of the relationship with each of us and her attitude along the way as remarkable. She didn't there was no ill will sort of a thing. She was happy to be there and happy to do it, and that was real strong, and I think it's instilled a certain amount of service and giving nature in all of us in our own ways.
Did your parents have a story that they like to share that you always heard come up at like family functions, or a joke, or something you could look back on fondly and smile about because it was the story they always told?
Oh, jeez.
Or even for you, a story that you like to tell again and again about your parents. You find it your go-to sort of memory of them.
Oh, I think there's some positive and some negative. Sometimes when I think about my dad, the first thing that comes to mind, unfortunately, is he had quite a temper.
Yeah.
He would, when I was young especially, it seemed like he wouldn't really listen to me, and it seemed like it took nothing to ignite my dad, and I I felt a little bit of that as I was beginning to be a parent myself, and had to really pull back from it and try and learn from that. And I guess the other thing is just that my mom and dad always were affectionate. They were not afraid to kiss each other in public and in front of us, and they were very close, I felt. But those specific memories are the ones that I was saying that I'm not really that great at pulling up.
Right.
This one time. I mean, I have to go back to those movies I was talking about and go, oh yeah, well, it was pretty cool when we moved into our house because it was one of the first houses in that neighborhood. But I can't pull it up from my own memory. It's from that movie.
Right.
So, I don't have too many of those specific ones.
It's great that you have those movies. Like you said, your dad was the one who was into filming?
Correct. Yes, he did.
So, in a sense, do you have memories of your dad walking around with that camera everywhere, like constantly pointing it at things and people?
Yeah, that I do have a memory of. Yeah, and he would, every once in a while he would set it down, and it would clunk around, and then you'd see him run around in front of it, and and he would wave quickly and then just go back behind it. But mostly it was very rare that my mom would be filming, but a few times she did, and so he was in it. But mostly it was pictures of my mom and the four of us, and at wherever, Niagara Falls or. We did take some family trips, so there was films of that too. Yeah.
You had mentioned that about your dad's temper, and as you've raised your own kids, you thought about that and really tried to pull back. Well, let's go to the positive side and say, well, what do you see in yourself from either of your parents that that's really just embedded itself in you?
Well, I think you probably read one of the other poems I wrote, which is called The First Teacher, and I think my mom was a teacher. She never got paid for it, but she was always trying to get us to read and write in English, also to learn some Armenian along the way, to know about the states, what are the names of the states and where are they, and but was very focused on kind of a giving service teaching, and I think that has helped me to become the teacher that I am today. Also, just the laughter, like I was talking about before, just to be a positive, optimistic person. I think I got that a lot from my mom, to kind of be easygoing and even creative. I think you'd say from her too. And my dad, I think, was the whole being responsible. He was he was the breadwinner. He was, went to work every day, and I admired, even on the weekends, he'd go to the National Guard thing. He was all about providing and giving us a better life and all that, and that really stuck with me. But as I got older and I have children, I saw them as grandparents. I saw that my dad had some of those other attributes too. He was giving, and he was, he had a softer side. I just didn't see it a whole lot when I was growing up. And, those sorts of things.
I'd like to wrap up with one question that may, take us down a couple of other paths, but just one general question, which you've already, I think, in a sense, have started to bring up. If you could hold on to one memory of each of those major people in your life, what would be the one memory you'd want to hold on to forever? So, like your mother, your father, your grandparents, and it could be something that you haven't brought up yet.
Sure. Yeah. Do I have a week to think about it, or?
Yeah. Well, it's
yeah. Well,
what comes up?
A couple come to mind right away. I mean, like I was saying, my grandma Kabodian was in the kitchen. And like just her laughing or cooking in the kitchen is just right away. I can see the kitchen. I can, it's easy. And then my grandpa Kabodian, we called him Babu. On Christmas Eve, we were always at their house on Christmas Eve, and he would be at the top of the steps, and we had a piñata that hung down, and we'd be banging on the piñata. And when it opened, he would be at the top of the steps, and he would be throwing money. Change, $50, and I still have some of those, JFK, I think they were dollars, whatever. He would be throwing all this change to kind of filter in with the candy, and we would be like going for candy and money, and that was my thing with him, was that moment happened every year, and I even started looking forward to that moment every year. My Babu Gadoshin would be sort of like that one poem that I wrote that you probably read, was about just working with him. He was such a hard worker, and the days that I got to actually work with him will always stick with me. I just admired how he would work beyond where I would have stopped. He wanted to do such a good job, and he put such extra effort into anything he did with people's lawns. He would be mowing them or whatever he was doing with them. Just the strength that he had physically, and then the determination to get it done. It was just always just stuck out. So my Grandma Gadoshin would be a little bit more distant, again, probably in the kitchen. I actually serving, the whole meal, the whole Gadoshin clan at a long table, and Grandma getting all the food on it. That aspect, she was all about, providing and make sure there was food. But I was a little bit more distant from her, I guess. So my mom, it would be just sitting down reading with her. I think from childhood, it would be just, whether it was with kids around, other kids around, or just the two of us, just that one-on-one time when she was helping me with Go Dog Go or whatever it was at that moment. She was great with finding time in her day. And then for my dad, I guess I'm going to have to use Holding the Light in the Garage. I'd like to find another one, but trying my best to have a relationship with my dad by kind of doing the things that he liked, but not quite getting as far as I wanted. It was even almost like we had some sort of a communication break because I couldn't quite get there. And by the way, he's the one that I still struggle to write about. I have written about all these other people that I'm talking about, but I don't have a really good piece about my dad, and I've been working on it for a long time. He's been gone for 8 years, almost 9 years, and I'm still working on that. So
it's funny that it almost parallels what you just described, holding that light and not quite being what you wanted it to be, right? That connection, and then the idea of struggling to write about it, that gap, that thing we're reaching for is the consistency, right?
Yeah, maybe I can use that and get started.
Yeah. Aram, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us and this project. I hope it continues to grow. And if you know anybody else from any heritage, please send them my way. I'll be happy to talk to them and really get people to share their heritage. I'll go back to your comment where you said, I don't, my memories aren't that great. I use the film. I think like this practice of just sitting down and talking about what we do know is huge moving forward. And so I really appreciate you being a part of this and really honoring all those beautiful people in your life.
Yeah, I did find that the more we talked, the more I did remember. So I know what you're talking about there. That's important to keep the discussion going, the conversation going. But I do appreciate you asking. Thanks for asking, and appreciate your questions and the time.
Thank you, Aram. Thank you.
You're welcome.